What if I told you that in a single moment, a teenager shattered centuries of royal tradition and left a prince so shaken he stormed out of the room? Imagine the hush that falls when an entire hall, filled with donors, celebrities, and dignitaries, watches the unexpected unfold. People had come for inspiration, to honor resilience, to cheer for children who had overcome unimaginable obstacles. Instead, they witnessed a scene that would dominate headlines, spark furious debates, and leave one royal's pride in pieces. The WellChild Awards, known for being a celebration of courage, kindness, and the indomitable human spirit, suddenly turned into the stage for a symbolic rebellion. But how? And why? That's exactly what we're going to uncover. And let me ask you, if you were in that room, would you have clapped for the young hero? Or gasped in disbelief at the breach of etiquette? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now let's set the scene. It was a night carefully choreographed, as royal appearances always are. Prince Harry, once known as the fun-loving, approachable royal, was set to attend as patron. His role? To add that royal shine, to meet the winners, to shake hands, to smile warmly for the cameras. It should have been an easy night, a safe night, a night that showed him not as a controversial exile, but as the caring prince who has long championed children with serious health needs. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. From the very beginning, the evening carried an unusual energy. The room glittered with lights, tables decorated with flowers, applause ringing out as stories of bravery were told. But beneath that polite clapping, there was tension. Maybe it was Harry's nervous smile. Maybe it was the press's ever-watchful lenses. After all, the prince wasn't just a guest of honor. He was a figure under scrutiny, walking into a country where many now saw him not as a hero, but as a deserter. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the presentation of the inspirational Young Person 15 to 18 Years Award. The winner, Declan Bitmead, just 17 years old. His story was already moving hearts before he even walked on stage. Years of struggle, resilience, bravery in the face of life's cruel challenges. Declan was not royalty, not famous, not cushioned by privilege. He was real. He was raw. He was admired. But in that collision of worlds, one born of hardship, the other of inherited titles, something remarkable was about to happen. You see, in royal tradition, addressing a prince requires formality, a title, respect embedded in centuries of monarchy. But Declan was different. He wasn't there to play a part in a centuries-old script. He wasn't there to feed the illusion of deference. He was there to accept his award as himself, no more, no less. And when he faced Harry, the hall waiting, the cameras flashing, Declan made his choice. He didn't call him Your Highness. He didn't bow his head in deference. He simply looked at him and called him Harry. Plain, direct, equal. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Audience members froze. Journalists nearly dropped their pens. Even some of the children seemed to pause in awe at the audacity of it. After all, who in their right mind speaks so casually to a prince? But maybe that was the point. Maybe Declan, with his quiet defiance, spoke a truth louder than any royal proclamation. Titles mean nothing compared to character. Harry's face told the story. The tight jaw, the flash of anger, the forced smile that couldn't quite mask the humiliation. In that moment, the prince who had stood on global stages, who had faced armies of photographers, who had told the world he didn't care what they thought, looked shaken, exposed, vulnerable in the worst way. And the irony? This wasn't a critic. This wasn't a journalist. This wasn't a political figure trying to score points. This was a teenager, honored for his courage, who simply refused to play along with an outdated tradition. Now think about this. Isn't it fascinating that the most powerful blows to power often don't come from rivals or enemies, but from those who have nothing to lose? Declan didn't need Harry's approval. He didn't need the royal seal of acknowledgement. He had already won in the eyes of everyone there. His battle had been for survival, not for status. And in that clash, the prince who had walked away from his palace, his military titles, and his homeland, suddenly found himself confronted by a boy who embodied everything he claimed to champion: honesty, resilience, and authenticity. But here's the question. Did Harry see that? Or did he only see the insult? Did he recognize the symbolism? Or was he too blinded by pride? Because make no mistake, this was not a small slight. For a man whose relationship with the monarchy is already strained, for someone accused of seeking relevance through titles while rejecting the duties attached to them, being stripped of deference by a young award recipient was nothing short of devastating. It was as though the very narrative Harry clung to, of being both royal and relatable, crumbled in real time. And what's more, the cameras caught every flicker of his expression, every twitch of his lips, every narrowing of his eyes. The world wasn't just watching a teenager win an award, it was watching a prince lose his composure. Now, pause and ask yourself, was this just a rebellious teenager making a statement? Or was this a reflection of how the public truly sees Harry now? No longer untouchable, no longer automatically respected, just a man, standing awkwardly in a room where the applause wasn't meant for him. And this is where the night took a turn no one saw coming. Because Harry, furious, embarrassed, and unable to swallow the sting, made a choice. He could have laughed it off, he could have brushed it aside, he could have leaned into the humility that once made him beloved. But instead, he did something that shocked even his staunchest supporters. He walked out. Yes, Prince Harry, the royal patron, the guest of honor, the one expected to uplift and inspire, stormed out of an awards ceremony meant for children. And that, my friends, was the moment everything changed. But here's the twist. What happened after that walkout was even more shocking. Whispers behind the stage, furious exchanges, gasps from those who witnessed what came next. And the world had no idea, until the truth started to leak out. Because this wasn't just about a title. It wasn't just about a refusal. It was about pride, fragility, and the unraveling of a prince who could no longer command the respect he once took for granted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The night was meant to be perfect, a showcase of courage, resilience, and inspiration. Yet the air inside the WellChild Awards carried a tension that few could ignore. The chandeliers sparkled, the tables gleamed, the audience buzzed with polite chatter, but behind the glamour, there was a sense that something was about to erupt. And isn't it strange how, in moments of celebration, the most unexpected drama can unfold? Think of it. Here was Prince Harry, a man who had once been the golden boy of the monarchy, a soldier, a rebel, the fun-loving royal who could charm a crowd in seconds. But tonight, he wasn't just another guest. He was the headline act, the royal patron, the symbol of honor for an event that had become synonymous with compassion and courage. On paper, it was the perfect fit. After all, Harry has long championed children's causes. He was supposed to shine here. He was supposed to belong. But belonging is a fragile thing, isn't it? Especially when your world has been turned upside down. Now, picture the scene. Photographers stationed at every corner, journalists scribbling notes, eager to catch the smallest detail. Guests in their finest outfits. Celebrities mingling with families. The applause swelling with every story of resilience. And then, amidst all this warmth and celebration, the audience's eyes kept drifting back to one figure. Harry, sitting tall, yet somehow restless. Smiling, but not with ease. His every movement watched, his every breath judged. Can you imagine being in that position? Every tilt of the head, every flicker of the eyes, every pause before clapping, scrutinized not just by the room, but by the millions waiting for photographs to hit the newsstands. Still, he had rehearsed this. He knew the drill. Smile, nod, shake hands. It was supposed to be routine, but life rarely follows the script. And then, the moment. The host stepped forward, voice steady, eyes scanning the crowd. The inspirational young person 15 to 18 years award was about to be announced. The atmosphere shifted. The clinking of glasses stilled. The conversations quieted. This was it, the centerpiece of the night. The name rang out, Declan Bitmeat. The applause erupted like thunder. Faces lit up with admiration as this 17-year-old boy, slight in frame but towering in spirit, made his way to the stage. The applause wasn't polite, it was heartfelt. Every clap was a tribute, every cheer a recognition of battles fought and won. And Harry? He leaned forward. He smiled wider than before. For a moment, it looked like he was in his element again. This was the kind of scene he knew, meeting children, encouraging them, being the prince who cared. But here's where fate intervened. Declan stood on stage, his award in hand, his gaze steady. You could feel his courage, the authenticity radiating off him. He wasn't intimidated by the grandeur of the room or the cameras flashing like lightning. He wasn't dazzled by the prince seated before him. He was himself, unapologetically so. And then, the expected moment of deference. The moment where the teenager should have said the words. The title. The bow. But instead, Declan spoke differently. He didn't say, "Your Highness." He didn't stumble nervously over royal etiquette. He looked Harry square in the eye and called him Harry. Just Harry. The silence that followed was deafening. Do you know the kind of silence? The kind where the air thickens, where you can almost hear the sound of hearts skipping a beat. That's what filled the room. Gasps echoed. Eyebrows shot up. Some clapped instinctively, others froze mid-motion. The press nearly dropped their pens. Even the host faltered for a second, unsure whether to continue or pause. And Harry? His smile faltered. For the briefest of moments, his face betrayed him. The tightening jaw, the flicker of rage, the eyes narrowing in disbelief. He had been stripped, not of a title on paper, but of the deference that title demanded. Think about that for a second. What's more powerful, losing your title formally or having it denied to your face? This wasn't a critic writing an article. This wasn't a commentator shouting from a TV screen. This was a teenager, in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, standing firm in his refusal to bend. And that's where everything changed. Because from that moment, the awards ceremony wasn't just about celebrating children. It became about a prince's pride, a boy's defiance, and the clash between tradition and truth. Guests exchanged glances. Some were shocked, others quietly impressed. Declan's courage wasn't just in surviving his struggles. It was in speaking his truth without fear of consequence. And Harry knew it. He could feel the power shift in the room. He was no longer the center of admiration. The applause wasn't for him. The respect wasn't his to claim. It belonged to Declan. But the night was only just beginning. Because Harry, for all his training, for all his experience, couldn't mask what came next. And as whispers rippled through the crowd, as cameras zoomed in closer, as every eye focused on the prince, his reaction was about to write the headline of the night. The real drama hadn't even started yet, because Harry's fury was building. And when it finally spilled over, it would leave the entire room in shock. But what happened next would make Declan's refusal look like only the first spark of an inferno no one could control. What makes a hero in the eyes of the public? Is it someone born into wealth, titles, and privilege, or someone who fights against all odds just to survive another day? That's the question that quietly echoed in the minds of those sitting in the WellChild Awards audience as Declan Bitmead took the stage. Here was a boy of 17, just 17, and yet, his story already held more weight, more heart, and more courage than anything a prince could ever carry in his name. Declan wasn't wrapped in velvet curtains or protected by palace gates. His life had been defined by challenges that most adults could not imagine enduring. Let's talk about Declan. Because to understand why his refusal to address Prince Harry as Your Highness mattered so much, you have to understand him. You have to know what kind of spirit stood on that stage, award in hand, staring into the eyes of royalty with nothing but honesty in his voice. Declan's story was one of resilience. From a young age, his health had been fragile, his journey punctuated by countless hospital visits, grueling treatments, and days where even taking a breath felt like a victory. While other children were playing football in the park or worrying about exams, Declan was fighting battles that tested the very core of his spirit. And yet, he smiled. He endured. He inspired. Imagine being his parents, watching your child face struggles that would break the strongest adult, and yet witnessing him rise each time with a bravery that seemed almost otherworldly. That's why the audience adored him. That's why the applause roared as he walked across the stage. This was not just a boy accepting an award. This was a symbol of human resilience in its purest form. And here's the irony. While Harry was the one born into titles, Declan had earned his recognition the hard way. No crowns, no inherited status, just grit, just strength, just truth. Now think about how that plays into the dynamic between the two. One man, battling to hold on to relevance, demanding respect through centuries-old titles. The other, a teenager, commanding admiration through raw courage alone. Which one, truly, was the highness in that room? This contrast, the heart of the story, is what made Declan's refusal to bend all the more powerful. Because Declan wasn't being rude. He wasn't staging a rebellion for attention. He was being himself. Authentic. Honest. Refusing to play into rituals that didn't resonate with him. And maybe that's exactly why the moment hit Harry so hard. But let's go deeper. Declan had grown up in a world where titles meant little. His heroes weren't monarchs or celebrities. They were doctors, nurses, his parents, and children just like him who kept going even when life tried to stop them. That's the foundation of his worldview. When he looked at Harry, he didn't see a man who deserved automatic reverence. He saw just another human being. And isn't that the most powerful act of all? To strip away illusion and address someone simply as they are. Now let's put ourselves back in that room. The applause fades. The cameras are still flashing. Declan accepts his award. And when he looks at Harry, when he says the word Harry instead of Your Highness, you could almost hear centuries of tradition crack. And here's the part most people miss. That moment wasn't about disrespect. It was about equality. Declan was telling the world, without saying it outright, that courage doesn't kneel before a title. That authenticity doesn't bow to privilege. Let me ask you, what would you have done in his place? Would you have felt the pressure to say the words, to follow the script? Or would you, like Declan, have had the courage to break it? Because this is where the true power of the moment lies. It wasn't just a personal choice. It was a reflection of a generation. A younger generation that sees monarchy not as untouchable, not as divine, but as human, flawed, fallible, just like everyone else. And Harry? He felt it. He felt the weight of that defiance in a way that cut deeper than any tabloid headline. Declan's words, simple as they were, pierced through the facade of royal dignity. And the more you think about it, the more you realize how symbolic it was. A teenager battling for his life every day had no time for pretense, no patience for empty tradition. He lived in reality, not ceremony. And maybe that's what stung Harry most of all. Because Harry, despite rejecting so much of the monarchy publicly, still craves the respect those titles bring. He still clings to the power of being a prince. Without it, who is he? Just Harry. And hearing those words from Declan's mouth was like a mirror being held up to his greatest fear, that the world no longer saw him as special. The audience, though, didn't miss a beat. Some were shocked, yes. Some whispered, eyes wide in disbelief. But others? They smiled. They clapped harder. They admired the boy even more. Because what Declan did wasn't just bold, it was liberating. And that's when the balance of the room shifted. In that instant, the true star of the night wasn't the prince. It was the teenager. The cameras turned, the applause focused, the energy realigned. Harry was no longer the center of attention, and you could see it on his face. That moment of realization. That flicker of anger masked as a smile. That tightening of his shoulders as if the weight of humiliation had just settled on him. What Declan had done, whether he intended to or not, was dethrone a prince, not from monarchy, but from the pedestal of admiration in that room. And Harry couldn't hide it. Not from the cameras, not from the crowd, not even from himself. But here's the real kicker. This was only the beginning. Because Declan's courage wasn't confined to that one word. It would ripple outward, into the media, into the debates, into the palace itself. And while Harry's face betrayed fury in that instant, his next move would ensure this wasn't just a minor awkward moment. It would become a scandal. But what Harry did next, right there in that glittering hall, would prove that this was more than just a teenager refusing a title. It was the beginning of a royal unraveling. And as Harry's fury began to show, the room would soon witness an action so shocking, so unexpected, that it would leave even his staunchest supporters questioning everything. Because Harry couldn't swallow the humiliation. He couldn't laugh it off. Instead, he let the anger win. And that's when the night truly exploded. What would you do if the entire world was watching, and in the blink of an eye, someone stripped you of the respect you thought was guaranteed? Would you laugh it off, pretend you didn't care, or would your pride betray you before you even realized it? That's exactly the trap Prince Harry fell into at the WellChild Awards. The stage lights were bright, the cameras relentless, the silence after Declan's refusal still vibrating in the air like the aftershock of an earthquake. Declan Bitmead had just accepted his award, looked directly at the Duke of Sussex, and chosen not to call him Your Highness. Just Harry. Two syllables that cut sharper than a sword, leaving a scar that would linger far longer than the applause. For a man who had spent years redefining his role, battling the tabloids, and clinging to the remnants of royal status even while rejecting the institution, that one word landed like a hammer blow. And the world saw it. Eve. The prince who had once been adored for his easy charm and relatability suddenly looked exposed. Fragile. Vulnerable in a way he could not control. And here's where it gets fascinating. Harry had options. He could have smiled broadly, clapped louder, even laughed it off with a playful, "Just Harry then." The very line he used when introducing himself in early interviews after leaving the royal fold. That would have disarmed the tension, charmed the room, and reinforced his image as the people's prince. But he didn't. Instead, his jaw clenched. His smile froze into something plastic. His eyes darkened, narrowing in a glare that betrayed his humiliation. Did he realize in that moment how much was at stake? Did he know that every movement of his face would be dissected by millions? Or was his pride simply too raw, too wounded to hide? The silence lingered. Declan, calm and steady, held his ground. He didn't flinch, didn't backtrack, didn't stumble into a nervous apology. He simply stood there, a boy of 17, radiating authenticity that no title could command. And the room knew. They knew they had just witnessed something seismic. The whispers began, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. Did he just? He didn't call him. Oh my goodness. Even the host seemed caught between professionalism and disbelief, pausing just long enough for the weight of the moment to sink in. And then came the applause. Not polite applause this time, but a roar of clapping that seemed to swell from the audience, fueled not just by Declan's story, but by the courage of his refusal. The crowd had chosen its hero, and it wasn't Harry. That, right there, was the dagger. Because the irony is almost unbearable, isn't it? Harry, who built his image on being the relatable royal, the one who wanted to be treated like everyone else, suddenly couldn't handle being treated as exactly that. Declan had taken him at his word, stripped away the title, the formality, the deference, and addressed him simply as Harry. And instead of embracing it, the prince recoiled. Why? Because at the end of the day, Harry still wanted the best of both worlds. He wanted the freedom of just Harry when it suited him, but the reverence of Your Highness when his pride demanded it. And Declan, perhaps unknowingly, had exposed that contradiction in front of the entire world. The applause continued. Declan smiled, his award glinting in the light. The cameras turned to him, capturing his triumphant moment. And Harry? He was no longer the star of the show. He was the background, a spectator to someone else's courage. And that's when the fury really started to build. You could see it in the way he shifted in his seat, the way his fingers tapped against his knee, the way his forced smile quivered at the edges. His pride had been punctured, and the cameras wouldn't let him escape. Think about it. For years, Harry had railed against the press for intruding on his life, for capturing his pain. Yet here he was, once again caught in the trap of visibility. Every emotion broadcast, every weakness exposed. And this time, it wasn't the tabloids doing the damage. It was a teenager, unafraid, unapologetic, unstoppable. The contradiction was almost poetic. The applause eventually died down. The program moved forward, but the energy in the room had changed. People were no longer focused on the ceremony. They were replaying the moment in their heads, whispering about it at their tables, sneaking glances at Harry to see how he would recover. But here's the truth. He didn't recover. He couldn't. The humiliation was too raw, the spotlight too unforgiving. And then, as Declan left the stage, something snapped. Harry rose to his feet, not with the graceful ease of a royal patron, but with the stiff, clipped movements of a man barely containing his anger. His chair scraped against the floor, loud in the silence. His smile was gone. His eyes were hard. And without a word, he turned and walked out. The room gasped. The host froze. The cameras pivoted, desperate to catch his retreat. And the whispers exploded into a low roar. The prince had walked out. Not after the ceremony. Not quietly. Not discreetly. But right there, in the middle of the awards, in front of children, families, and cameras. It was an exit that spoke louder than words. But why? Why walk out? Was it pure humiliation, boiling into rage? Was it a calculated move to avoid further embarrassment? Or was it something deeper? A realization that the respect he once commanded so effortlessly was gone, stripped away by a teenager's courage. And here's the most haunting question of all. Did he realize, in that moment, that his legacy had shifted forever? That one boy, with one refusal, had symbolically dethroned him, not from monarchy, but from the hearts of the people? Because what Harry didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The walkout wasn't the end of the scandal. It was the spark that ignited it. Behind those doors, away from the stage, the fury only grew. Words were exchanged. Staff scrambled. Witnesses whispered. And soon, the story that began with a teenager's quiet defiance would explode into a full-blown royal humiliation heard around the world. Because Declan's refusal was shocking, Harry's exit was dramatic. But what happened backstage made it unforgettable. And when those whispers reached the press, the fallout would be impossible to contain. Have you ever seen a man try to hide his fury, only to fail so spectacularly that the mask slips for all to see? That was Prince Harry at the WellChild Awards, moments after Declan Bitmead refused to call him Your Highness. The cameras had already caught the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the twitch of his lips. But it wasn't until he left the stage area, storming behind the curtain, that the full force of his temper erupted. The exit itself had been dramatic enough. Chairs scraped, guests gasped, the silence of the hall punctuated by hurried footsteps. But what came next, the backstage meltdown, was something no royal aide could have predicted and no spin doctor could disguise. Let's set the scene. The moment Harry disappeared from the audience's view, he was swarmed by aides. Their whispers were frantic, their hands motioning him to calm down. But he wasn't listening. His face was flushed, his shoulders tense, his words clipped and sharp. "Did you see that?" he spat, his voice low but edged with rage. "Did you see what he did?" In front of everyone. The aides, seasoned in crisis management, tried to soothe him. "It's just a boy, sir," one began, only to be cut off by a glare that could freeze stone. "Just a boy," Harry snapped. "That boy humiliated me." Cameras everywhere. Headlines already writing themselves. Prince Harry snubbed by teenager. Do you think that's nothing? And here's the irony that makes this moment almost tragic. Harry has long painted himself as a man who rejects the rigid formalities of royalty, who wants to be seen as human, approachable, ordinary. And yet when Declan treated him exactly as that, ordinary, Harry exploded. Isn't it fascinating how the image you build for yourself can crumble the moment it's tested? Now, imagine being one of the staffers in that cramped backstage corridor. You're watching a prince unravel not because of a political scandal, not because of a press ambush, but because a teenager refused to say 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words. And the irony cut even deeper when someone whispered, "But didn't he once say, 'Just call me Harry'?" That, of course, was years ago, his attempt to seem humble, relatable, loved. Yet now, when Declan took him at his word, the prince couldn't stomach it. The contradictions were glaring. And this is where the story shifts from a personal humiliation to something larger. Because Harry's fury wasn't just about Declan. It was about everything that moment represented. The rejection of deference. The crumbling of automatic respect. The loss of an aura he once carried effortlessly. But the fury grew darker when whispers from the stage filtered backstage. Guests were applauding Declan louder than ever. They admired his bravery not only in surviving his struggles, but in refusing to bow to royal tradition. And each clap, each cheer that echoed through the walls, seemed to stab at Harry's pride. Can you imagine hearing that? Sitting in a corridor while the applause meant for you was redirected, swelling for someone else? That was the reality Harry faced in that moment. And he couldn't contain it. His fists clenched. His voice rose. He cursed under his breath, snapping at the aides who hovered helplessly. This is ridiculous. This is unacceptable. He should have shown respect. Everyone should. But here's the truth. Respect isn't owed. It's earned. And that's the bitter pill Harry couldn't swallow. Meanwhile, the press outside had caught wind of the walkout. Reporters, ever hungry for scandal, were already texting their editors. Harry storms out of WellChild Awards. Social media lit up within minutes. Hashtags swirling, speculation running rampant. Was he ill? Was he offended? Had he clashed with someone? No one knew the full story yet, but the narrative was forming, and it wasn't flattering. And Harry knew it. That's why his fury wasn't just about the moment. It was about the story it would become. He could already see the headlines, hear the mocking commentary, feel the weight of public ridicule pressing down. The aides urged him to return, to save face, to smile and clap as though nothing had happened. "You can't just leave, sir. The cameras." But Harry shook his head. "No, I'm not going back out there. Not after that." It was pride, plain and simple. Pride that left no room for humility, no space for grace. And yet, wasn't that exactly what the situation called for? A smile, a shrug, a laugh. A line like, "He's right, I am just Harry." That's all it would have taken to win the room back. But instead, he chose fury. And fury always writes its own story. The whispers backstage grew louder. Volunteers and staff exchanged nervous glances. Some were shocked at his behavior. Others were simply disappointed. Because in that moment, Harry wasn't the prince who lifted spirits. He wasn't the patron who inspired courage. He was just a man consumed by pride, rattled by a teenager's truth. And here's the twist. The palace would hear about it. The media would dig into it. Declan's refusal and Harry's reaction would become more than just gossip. They would become symbols of something deeper. The clash between old tradition and a new generation that refuses to play along. But Harry wasn't thinking about symbolism that night. He was thinking about himself, his pride, his humiliation, his fury. And as the aides scrambled to contain the fallout, Harry made a decision that would turn an awkward moment into a full-blown scandal. He wasn't going to quietly return to his seat. He wasn't going to smooth things over. Instead, he walked out for good, leaving behind not just the awards, but the image of humility he once claimed to embody. And as the doors closed behind him, the whispers turned into a frenzy. Because everyone in that hall knew something extraordinary had just happened. A teenager had stood firm. A prince had lost his composure. And the world was about to hear the story. But the headlines that followed would make the humiliation burn even hotter, and Harry wasn't ready for what came next. Because the public reaction wouldn't be kind. It would be brutal. And once again, Harry would find himself at the center of a storm he couldn't control. Have you ever watched someone leave a room in such a fury that the air itself seemed to change? That's what it felt like at the WellChild Awards when Prince Harry made the choice that would dominate headlines around the globe. His decision to walk out wasn't just dramatic, it was seismic. The entire atmosphere inside that glittering hall shifted the moment he rose from his chair, the tension so thick it could almost be touched. It started with the scrape of wood on wood, his chair pushing back against the polished floor. That sound alone cut through the applause still echoing from Declan Bitmed's courageous moment. People turned their heads instinctively, eyes widening, breaths catching. The cameras, already trained on him, followed in a frenzy. Harry's face was set, his movements rigid, his steps clipped and fast. He wasn't just leaving, he was storming out. Imagine being in that audience. One moment you're clapping for a teenager's resilience. The next you're watching a prince unravel before your eyes. Murmurs began instantly, like ripples spreading across a still pond. "Where's he going?" whispered one guest. "Is he upset?" asked another. The host faltered, caught off guard, their words stumbling as they tried to keep the program moving. The award winners, seated at their tables, glanced at each other nervously. Parents leaned down to reassure their children. Even the youngest attendees, kids who had faced unimaginable challenges, sensed something was wrong. A prince wasn't supposed to act like this. A patron wasn't supposed to abandon the very event he had been there to honor. And yet, that's exactly what he did. Harry's footsteps echoed louder than the applause, louder than the whispers, louder than the nervous coughs that punctuated the silence. His body language screamed anger, shoulders stiff, fists clenched, eyes forward with a glare that brooked no approach. Aides tried to intercept him, whispering urgently, gesturing for him to pause, but he brushed them aside with a flick of the hand. He wasn't stopping. He wasn't turning back. The double doors at the back of the hall swung open as he pushed through them, the heavy slam reverberating like a final exclamation point. And just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Guests sat frozen, unsure whether to clap, to murmur, to continue as though nothing had happened. The host, visibly rattled, tried to steer the ceremony back on course, their voice trembling slightly as they announced the next segment. But the damage was done. The magic of the evening, the warmth, the inspiration, the celebration of resilience, had been overshadowed by the fury of a prince who couldn't contain his pride. And this is where the story takes its cruelest twist. Because Harry had meant to make a statement by walking out. He had meant to show his anger, his disapproval, his unwillingness to be disrespected. But instead, all he did was hand the narrative to Declan. The teenager became the hero of the night, the symbol of courage, the embodiment of truth standing tall in the face of tradition. And Harry? He became the villain of his own story. Think about it. Who wins in that moment? The boy who stood his ground, calm and composed, or the prince who stormed out like a child denied his toy? The answer was obvious, and the room knew it. The whispers grew into a low buzz. Guests leaned across tables, sharing theories. Some defended Harry, saying he was under immense pressure, that the moment had simply been too much. Others shook their heads, unimpressed, muttering about entitlement and fragility. It was just a word, one guest said, disbelief etched across their face. He left because of a word? And the children? Oh, the children. Many of them had endured hardships far beyond their years. They had faced hospitals, treatments, setbacks, and pain that would break most adults. To them, courage meant getting out of bed in the morning, smiling through the pain, finding joy in the smallest victories. Watching a prince walk out over a perceived slight must have felt surreal. The contrast was painful. Here were children battling for their lives, clapping and smiling, grateful just to be present. And there was Harry, storming out because his pride had been pricked. The optics couldn't have been worse. But optics weren't Harry's concern in that moment. Pride was. Anger was. And that choice, to leave rather than to stay, was about to haunt him in ways he couldn't have imagined. Because outside those doors, the press was waiting. Cameras clicked furiously as Harry strode past, his expression thunderous. Journalists shouted questions, their voices rising above the chaos. "Why did you leave, sir? Are you upset with the winner? Prince Harry, are you walking out in protest?" He ignored them all, his jaw set, his eyes fixed ahead. But silence can sometimes speak louder than words. And in this case, his silence screamed volumes. Back inside, the audience tried to recover. The hosts stumbled through the script, performers took the stage, speeches were given, but the energy was gone. Every word, every clap, every laugh was overshadowed by the memory of those slammed doors. And here's the irony. The event that night was about resilience, about standing tall in the face of life's greatest challenges. And the one person who failed that test was the royal who was supposed to embody it. Do you see the contradiction? Harry had positioned himself for years as the prince who broke free from the shackles of tradition, the one who valued honesty over titles, authenticity over pomp. Yet when faced with a boy who embodied those very principles, he crumbled. The headlines were already writing themselves. Prince Harry storms out of WellChild Awards. Teenager snubs prince. Royal patron humiliated. And as the night wore on, the narrative grew sharper, harsher, more unforgiving. Social media erupted, hashtags trending, memes multiplying. Harry wasn't just the story of the night, he was the punchline. And Declan? He became the symbol of something bigger. His refusal wasn't seen as rudeness, it was seen as bravery. His calm demeanor contrasted so starkly with Harry's fury that the public couldn't help but admire him. A boy who had faced unimaginable struggles stood his ground with dignity, while a prince who had once been celebrated for his humility stormed out in anger. The contrast was brutal, the symbolism undeniable. But what Harry didn't realize was that the walkout wasn't the end of the scandal. It was just the beginning. Because behind those slammed doors, his fury didn't fade. It grew. And what he said, what he did, and how he lashed out behind the scenes would soon leak to the press. And when it did, the story would explode. Because the walkout was dramatic. The silence in the hall was unforgettable. But what happened next, behind closed doors, was even more shocking. And no one, not even Harry himself, could stop it from spilling out. The glittering chandeliers of the WellChild Awards hall had dimmed slightly after the commotion, but behind the closed doors in the backstage area, the storm had only just begun. While the audience tried to compose themselves, unaware of the escalating drama behind the scenes, Prince Harry's fury was a living thing, coiling, striking, refusing to be contained. Every step he took, every word he muttered to his aides, echoed a tension that was palpable, almost dangerous. It started with the immediate aftermath of the exit. Harry didn't just walk away from the stage. He stormed into the private hallway, the echo of his footsteps bouncing off the ornate walls like a drumbeat of anger. The aides trailing behind him were hesitant, caught in the delicate dance of duty versus self-preservation. They had seen him flustered, annoyed, upset, but never like this. His jaw was locked. His eyes were flashing, scanning for anyone who might challenge him. "Sir," one aide said cautiously, stepping closer, "maybe we should. Maybe W." There was a sharp edge to his voice that made even seasoned staffers flinch. This was not the calm, composed prince who had charmed crowds at charity events. This was a man betrayed, not by enemies, not by the press, but by a 17-year-old boy's refusal to conform to a centuries-old tradition of deference. Declan Bitmed's simple act of integrity, refusing to address Harry as "Your Highness," had ignited a powder keg. And Harry's reaction would only fuel the narrative that would soon dominate headlines. Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, the event organizers were scrambling. Staff members whispered frantically, trying to understand what had triggered such an extreme reaction. Some blamed the intense media attention. Others speculated that it was the culmination of months of personal stress. But the truth was far more uncomfortable. Harry felt publicly disrespected, and in that moment, his royal title, normally a shield, had become a burden. It wasn't just about etiquette. It was about control, about perception, about the image he had painstakingly built over decades, both in public and private. And it had been shattered in the span of a few seconds by a boy whose courage far outshone his own. A meeting was hastily convened backstage, with event coordinators, security personnel, and Harry's aides attempting to assess the situation. But as soon as the door closed, the tension exploded again. "He's not thinking rationally," one aide whispered to another. "He's furious, and I don't know if he can hear us." "You need to calm him down," another replied. "We can't have this escalating. Not here, not now." But Harry was beyond calm, beyond reason. He paced the room like a predator, fists clenched, muttering fragments of thoughts that hinted at humiliation, pride, and betrayal. "He had no right," Harry said under his breath. "No right to do that. And everyone thinks I overreacted. I didn't. He just undermined everything." Security staff, trained for emergencies far more severe than backstage meltdowns, kept a careful distance, knowing that confrontation might make the situation worse. Their eyes flicked nervously between Harry and his aides, waiting for a cue that might never come. The aides tried again. "Sir, maybe we can." Harry cut them off, his voice low but cutting, venomous in its intensity. "No, I don't want to hear it. Do you know what it feels like to be disrespected in front of the world? To have your authority questioned in the span of a few words?" The room seemed to shrink under the weight of his anger. Some aides exchanged worried glances, silently calculating how to mitigate what was clearly becoming a PR nightmare. Others were frozen, caught between loyalty and self-preservation. Then came the whispers of confrontation that no one had expected. The producer of the awards, a figure known for her composure under pressure, approached Harry cautiously. "Your Highness," she began, voice steady but firm. "Perhaps we can discuss this calmly. I understand you're upset." Harry turned sharply, eyes blazing. "Upset? You think I'm upset? I'm furious. Infuriated. And you stand there and tell me to be calm? After everything, after being humiliated in front of a room full of children, parents, and the media? No, I will not be calm." The tension thickened. It was palpable. Even seasoned professionals felt the air grow heavy, almost electric, as if the walls themselves were charged with anticipation. Everyone knew something was about to break, something that could no longer be contained. Outside, the press sensed the undercurrent of drama. Journalists stationed near the exit whispered to one another, noting Harry's prolonged absence. Social media feeds were already buzzing with speculation. What had caused the prince to vanish mid-event? Who had dared provoke him? Every second he lingered backstage, the narrative was growing wilder, more uncontrollable. Inside, Harry's aides tried one last tactic: reason. "Sir, perhaps we can frame this differently. Perhaps we can focus on Declan's achievement rather than your reaction." But Harry's eyes were alight with a mix of indignation and disbelief. "Focus on his achievement," he spat, pacing. Do you understand what just happened? He defied me. He defied a title older than him. And I am supposed to smile and applaud? No, not tonight. Not ever. A sudden knock at the door startled everyone. A senior security officer stepped inside, careful but firm. Sir, we need to. Harry didn't wait. He spun on his heel, muttering under his breath as he left the room, his anger leaving a trail in the tense air behind him. This wasn't just a walkout, it was a declaration. A statement. A refusal to bow, in his eyes, to disrespect, even as the world watched and waited. What happened next, however, would turn the situation from a private backstage incident into a global spectacle. Because someone Harry trusted, had captured a fragment of the confrontation on camera. A video clip, a few seconds long, but enough to ignite social media and send news outlets into a frenzy. And the narrative was no longer just about a walkout. It was about rage, pride, humiliation, and a royal unraveling in real time. By the time the awards resumed, the story had already begun to spread. Whispered conversations had become trending hashtags. Memes were circulating. Opinions, judgments, and emotional reactions poured in from around the globe. And while Harry may have thought he could contain the situation behind closed doors, the world had already seen the cracks in the armor. Because when a prince loses control, the consequences aren't just personal. They are historical, public, and irreversible. And what came next? The leak, the confrontation with his own staff, the private fallout, would escalate the drama to a level no one could have predicted. The moment Harry exited the WellChild Awards in anger, the world began to shift. In today's hyper-connected era, nothing stays private. A few seconds of video, a hurried tweet, and suddenly, what was once a backstage confrontation became a global spectacle. Newsrooms lit up like Christmas trees. Social media platforms became digital war zones. Every commentator, every tabloid, every viewer with a smartphone had an opinion, and they were not holding back. Within minutes, clips of Harry storming out, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief, were circulating on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. The hashtags #HarryWalkout and #WellChildDrama began trending worldwide, and viewers flooded comment sections with their interpretations, emotions, and judgments. Some sympathized with Harry, arguing that respect must be earned, even from a teenager. Others criticized him for overreacting, painting the image of a prince unable to control his emotions when confronted with a challenge to his authority. But what made this incident particularly volatile was the juxtaposition of events. Declan Bitmead, the 17-year-old winner of the Inspirational Young Person 15 to 18 award, had become an instant symbol of courage. His refusal to address Harry as Your Highness resonated with millions who admired his integrity. Young people, in particular, latched onto the story as a metaphor for speaking truth to power. This narrative clashed violently with the royal family's carefully curated image, sparking debates over respect, hierarchy, and entitlement. Television networks ran repeated loops of the walkout, dissecting Harry's expressions, gestures, and the reactions of the aides behind him. Pundits analyzed his body language, debating whether his reaction was fueled by genuine offense, pent-up frustration from prior events, or a deeper, more personal struggle with his role within the royal family. Every detail was scrutinized, from the exact words he had reportedly muttered backstage to the subtle tilt of his head as he exited the hall. Meanwhile, the royal press office scrambled to contain the damage. Official statements were drafted, revised, and retracted multiple times. One spokesperson described Harry's behavior as regrettable, yet human, while another emphasized the prince's long-standing commitment to supporting young people, attempting to pivot attention back to Declan's achievement. But the rapid-fire nature of social media meant that these statements were almost instantly drowned out by speculation, memes, and opinion pieces. On Twitter, reactions were starkly polarized. Some users praised Declan for his courage. This 17-year-old just taught a prince a lesson in humility. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. Others criticized the teen. How dare he disrespect the prince? Some traditions exist for a reason. Each post, retweet, and comment magnified the story's reach, creating a viral feedback loop that even the royal communications team could not control. The story spread beyond social media into mainstream news. Headlines screamed, Prince Harry storms out of charity event after teen refuses royal title, and WellChild awards marred by royal meltdown. Opinion pieces examine the incident from every angle: historical, psychological, sociological, turning what should have been a celebratory evening into a subject of global debate. But beneath the surface, deeper questions began to emerge. Analysts began to ask, what does this reveal about the modern monarchy's relationship with the public? Is the royal hierarchy becoming obsolete in the eyes of younger generations who value integrity over titles? How should members of the royal family navigate the delicate balance between tradition and contemporary expectations? Inside the palace, reactions were equally intense. Advisors debated whether Harry's actions reflected a deeper personal issue or a calculated act of rebellion. Some feared that this incident would damage public perception of the prince irreparably, potentially influencing future engagements, charitable work, and even international relations. Others argued that the episode highlighted a necessary honesty, a willingness to reject hollow formalities in favor of authentic human connection. The media frenzy also reached Declan. Interviews were requested, agents reached out, and journalists attempted to schedule appearances. The young winner, already processing the emotional weight of his award, now faced the daunting task of navigating worldwide attention. His refusal to address Harry as Your Highness was praised by some and criticized by others, turning him into an unlikely figurehead in a global conversation about respect, power, and generational change. Meanwhile, online, memes and viral videos multiplied. One depicted Harry dramatically exiting the stage with the caption, "When someone forgets to call you Your Highness." Another, more sympathetic, showed a still image of Declan with the words, "Courage is sometimes louder than tradition." These pieces of digital content amplified the story, ensuring that it remained in public consciousness long after the awards ceremony ended. As the story gained momentum, commentators began exploring Harry's past controversies, linking the WellChild incident to prior public disputes, interviews, and moments of tension within the royal family. Analysts speculated that the walkout was not an isolated event, but part of a larger pattern of challenges he faced in balancing personal values with royal expectations. Every anecdote, every past public appearance, and every interview became fodder for comparison, creating a narrative that extended beyond the evening's event. And while the public debate raged, Harry's inner circle worked tirelessly behind closed doors, trying to contain the fallout. Lawyers, PR specialists, and royal aides convened emergency meetings to discuss strategy, messaging, and potential long-term consequences. Every decision was weighed against the backdrop of intense media scrutiny, social media virality, and the unpredictable nature of public perception. But the irony was impossible to ignore. The event was meant to celebrate courage, achievement, and the spirit of young people overcoming adversity. Instead, it became a case study in the very dynamics it sought to highlight: power, authority, respect, and the generational tensions that define the modern era. The conversation had shifted entirely from charity and inspiration to anger, reputation, and public spectacle. And as the night turned into morning, the story continued to evolve. Headlines adapted, social media algorithms pushed the narrative further, and millions of viewers worldwide were now invested in the drama. What had started as a simple refusal to use a formal title had escalated into a cultural moment, one that would be dissected, debated, and remembered for years to come. But even as the media frenzy reached its peak, a private storm was brewing within the palace, one that threatened to spill over into the very heart of the royal family. The decisions made in the hours following the walkout would determine not just the public narrative, but Harry's own path forward. And what came next? The confrontation with senior royal advisors, the internal backlash, and the private reckoning would push the drama beyond the public stage and into deeply personal territory, testing relationships, loyalty, and the very limits of royal composure. No one outside the WellChild Awards could have imagined what was happening behind the closed doors of the palace. As cameras flashed and social media erupted with footage of Prince Harry storming out, inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, whispers, and the weight of centuries-old traditions suddenly clashing with raw, unfiltered emotion. Immediately after the incident, Harry was escorted to a private suite away from the press. The aide who accompanied him could feel the palpable storm radiating off the prince. Every step heavy, every movement charged with frustration and disbelief. Questions swirled. How could a 17-year-old, a mere teenager, so effortlessly strip away centuries of royal expectation? How could the symbolic gesture of addressing him as Your Highness be rejected so publicly, so defiantly? As Harry sat, gathering himself, advisors began to arrive, their expressions a mixture of concern and unease. Each person brought a different perspective. Some urged immediate public damage control, warning that the global media was already spinning a narrative that could not be contained. Others focused on the human element. Harry had been embarrassed in front of the world, yes, but he was also responding to something deeper, something personal that required understanding, not just PR. The discussion was tense from the outset. Senior aides spoke first, their voices measured but firm. Your Highness, one began cautiously, we must consider the optics. The footage is already circulating. Every news outlet, every social media platform, is dissecting your reaction. The world is watching. Harry's response was sharp, almost defensive. I don't care about optics. This isn't about headlines. It's about respect. It's about being treated with the dignity this role demands. His eyes were intense, scanning the room for reactions. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. A palace historian, brought in to provide context, attempted to offer perspective. Sir, the monarchy has always faced moments of public challenge, but rarely has a youth figure, someone outside the formal power structure, confronted a member of the royal family in such a visible way. This is unprecedented. The advisors exchanged glances. Unprecedented was an understatement. It wasn't just a challenge to Harry personally. It was a challenge to the institution itself. Generational divides were becoming more apparent, and the symbolism of the act, the refusal to address a prince by his formal title, was seismic in the eyes of the public and the palace alike. Harry's frustration deepened. He felt trapped between his role as a public figure and his personal convictions. Every angle of the evening replayed in his mind. Declan's calm defiance, the applause from the audience, the stunned expressions of other attendees. It wasn't just a refusal, he muttered, voice low but tense. It was a statement that I'm not above scrutiny, that I can be confronted like anyone else. And it hurts, because I've dedicated my life to service, to people, to causes that matter. And in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. An aide leaned forward cautiously. Sir, perhaps this is an opportunity. Harry cut him off. An opportunity? To be humiliated? To have my authority questioned in front of the world? That's not an opportunity. That's betrayal. His hand trembled slightly as he ran it over his face, a rare crack in the otherwise controlled facade he maintained in public. The conversation shifted, subtly but inexorably, from the immediate incident to the broader implications. Legal advisors raised the question of privacy violations. Was any footage taken in violation of event agreements? Could they prevent further spread? PR strategists countered, arguing that such attempts would only intensify public curiosity, sparking further backlash. Every option was fraught with risk. Meanwhile, senior royals, alerted to the situation via secure channels, began weighing in. Messages arrived, some gently chiding, others sternly instructing. Control your emotions. Remember your role. Another, focus on the young man's achievement, not your reaction. Yet another emphasized caution. This could define your public perception for months, if not years. Harry's mind raced. He knew the optics were terrible, but what gnawed at him more was the perceived betrayal of respect. It wasn't just Declan's words or actions. It was the idea that centuries of carefully maintained deference could be dismissed so casually by someone who represented the future of his generation. It was a confrontation he hadn't anticipated, a collision between the weight of tradition and the irrepressible energy of youth. The discussion grew heated. Some advisors advocated issuing a public statement expressing regret. Others recommended silence, letting the story fade. Harry, however, refused to consider the typical royal scripts. I will not apologize for being human, he insisted. I will not diminish what I felt, what I experienced, for the sake of headlines. And then came the question that none of the advisors could answer definitively. What next? How should the prince respond without further inflaming tensions? How could he reconcile his personal indignation with his public responsibilities? The balance was precarious, the stakes higher than ever. As hours passed, the palace began to feel like a pressure cooker. Every new tweet, every news cycle, every social media post amplified the tension. Advisors grew weary, their strategies colliding, their consensus impossible. The incident had transcended a mere charity event. It had become a test of character, a public reckoning, and a potential turning point for Harry's role within the monarchy. And just when it seemed the situation could not escalate further, a confidential message arrived. A senior official had gathered information suggesting that the story was about to take an unexpected turn, something beyond media coverage, beyond public opinion, something internal to the royal family itself. What this revelation entailed, who was involved, and how it would affect Harry's standing remained unknown, but it promised to push the drama beyond anything the public had yet seen.